Hello, friends. Clearly, I'm not Seth. This is editor AJ. Since Seth is away through most of June, I figured I'd jump in here with a little retrospective of one of my favorite topics of his, the one question. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Make sure to like and subscribe. But if you are a Seth regular, you'll know what that one question is. So say it along with Seth.
And if you've hung around this channel for any length of time, I'm sure you know what the question is. What is one thing that I can do better? What is one thing I can do to improve?
All you need to do is ask that question over and over and over again.
What is one thing I can improve? What is one way that I can do better today than I did yesterday? That's what we're doing. We're putting our content out into the world, and then every single time somebody says something mean about it, and they will, you say, great, what's one thing I can do to improve? Is there something in this manuscript that if I improved it would have the largest impact? If I know that reps times improvement equals progress, then as long as I look for one thing to improve every time I make a piece of bad art, I know that I'm going to improve. I just have to keep going. Did somebody not like your story? Good. Ask them what's one thing you can do to improve. Somebody say your character's stupid? Good. Ask them, what's one way I can make this character smarter? Somebody doesn't like the plot twist you threw in? Awesome. Ask them, how could I have foreshadowed this better so that you resonated with it and liked it? First of all, this is just a fantastic strategy for shutting up haters. I mean, if somebody says something mean and the person responds with, thank you so much for the feedback, I'd love to know how I can improve, like, that just takes all of the fun out of hating. And you'll find that most people may speak in a way that sounds hateful, that sounds mean, but really they're happy to help if you engage with them. If you take nothing else away from this video, understand this. Being able to get feedback and incorporate it is a superpower. And if you can do that, you don't need any model, you don't need any special tools. You're going to be successful. If you can incorporate feedback every single day and improve every single day, you're going to do fine. In his book, Atomic Habits, which is arguably the best book on habit formation in existence, James Clear has a graph that shows the effect of a 1% improvement every day over the course of a year. 1% is a tiny, tiny improvement. But compounded over the course of a year, a person who gets 1% better will be 37 times better at whatever it was they were doing. That is not 37% better. That is 37 times better. So if you improve your writing every single day 1%, you will be a much better writer by the end of the year. This is where feedback becomes tremendously important. If I want to make a living as an author, I need a lot of people to give me a little bit of money. And feedback is the mechanism by which I understand whether or not my books are getting better in a way that readers like. Because it's possible, it's entirely possible to improve as a writer and then sell less books. I know people who have done this. They've gotten better as writers in sort of an absolute sense, and their audience is just not interested in what they write anymore. And that's a really frustrating position to be in. And it leads to a false conclusion that we shouldn't get better because our audience might not like it.
The ideas that we want to incorporate into our stories are the ideas that other people find best. Because that's what's going to keep our readers engaged. That's what's going to keep our readers reading. If we're just focused on sort of what we like in a story, and focusing on what we like in a story is really important. But what's more important is focusing on what other people like, because that's how we sell books. And if you want to be an author, selling books is pretty important. So how do we do this on a practical level? Well, one of the things that I like to do is just give other people power. Let other people decide. You know, it's way easier to kill my darlings when I am not the one who has to make the final cut. If somebody else says, you know, this just isn't working, I've found it very helpful to say, okay, I'm going to take your advice. Now, obviously, you do this with people who you trust, but you say, okay, I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to cut it. It's gone.
And this is probably the most important point, so pay close attention. Please take their feedback. I can't tell you how many authors I have encountered who ask for feedback and then just reject it out of hand. They don't actually consider it. Or even if they do consider it, they never take advice. Just imagine that you're a reader. Would you be interested in giving your opinion to somebody who literally just never listens? No, of course you're not going to be. So make sure that if you are asking somebody for feedback, that you are taking their feedback into consideration. That doesn't mean you have to do everything they say. It just means that you have to actually pay attention to it, actually give it due consideration, and make adjustments where appropriate. So feedback from the public gives us perspective that we wouldn't otherwise have. And this presents a problem because, as we've already established, sometimes that feedback really hurts. Sometimes we hear it and we go, oh, I thought I was better at this. I thought I was good at this. Sometimes it just reinforces a doubt that we already had about ourselves. And that's tough. That's really hard to overcome. I've been blessed with a fairly high level of detachment, just naturally. But even then, I had to constantly remind myself, these people are talking about my writing, they're not talking about me. And even if the feedback was worded in such a way that it cast aspersions on my character as opposed to on my writing, by reminding myself that, hey, this is actually about my writing and it's not about me, I was able to create that necessary professional distance so that I could properly apply what I'm learning from the feedback without letting it crush me. The quality of your art does not reflect the quality of your being. There are some overlaps. It's unavoidable because you are the person who has created the piece of art. However, your art and your being are distinct. And so no matter how good or bad your art is, it's just a thing. It's separate from you. The challenge of receiving feedback literally never changes. No matter how good you are, no matter how long you've been at it, no matter how much success you have, the sting of a negative comment or a bad review is not going to go away. I wrote a book called Soul Caller. And Soul Caller is a book that I just loved tremendously. I loved it. It was a style of writing that I had never written before, but it was a style that was emulating some of my favorite books of all time. Okay, and I botched it pretty badly. This is always nuanced to talk about because some people are going to read the book and be like, Seth, it was fine. Like, it was fine. But when I read back over book 1 of that series, because then I later wrote book 2, right? When I read back over book 1, I saw some really significant, glaring errors that I made. Some pacing problems. And it stung for a moment, right? Because I read over the book and I was like, ooh, Seth, like, what were you even thinking? Like, why did you think this was going to work? But because I have this assumption that none of my books are going to be as good as I want them to be, none of my books are going to be perfect, because I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly improving and I'm constantly getting better, it didn't sting very long. And in fact, I started to think to myself, man, this is cool, right? I learned a super valuable lesson. I tried to take two genres and I tried to mesh them together, and I got a pacing discrepancy wrong. I didn't do a good job in aligning the pacing. Cool, you know what? That means the next time I go to do that, I'm going to have a much better chance of hitting my target. I'm going to have a much better chance of succeeding. One of my favorite ideas is that the best way to gain confidence is not through positive affirmation. We don't tell ourselves, I'm good at this. Instead, we outwork our self-doubt. If you put your mind to it and you work hard, you will have achievement. And you can stack those achievements, however small, to outweigh the self-doubt. Life is just tremendously better when we don't do things correctly. Perfection leaves no room for improvement. And so to do something perfectly is to stagnate. To do something perfectly, or to attach the perfect label to whatever we do, is to just not ever get better. And the thing is that there's always something that could be better. That is a mindset of inevitable success. Every step I take brings me one step closer to my end goal. Holding this belief is not about sort of blind optimism or a sense of naivete. No, this is really about understanding that you are just not going to stop. You're going to keep going until you get there. That no matter what stands in front of you, you're just going to keep working on it. And if what you're doing isn't working, you're going to make changes. And if that's not working, you're going to make changes. And if that's not working, you're going to make changes. And you're going to keep adjusting and keep learning and keep growing until you get where you want to go.